Shalom again. We're in chapter 42 of Ezekiel. Rounding out the text. I know I've been saying that for months, but I told you when we started we spent at least a year in the book, so we're getting there. Told you a few weeks ago, the remainder of the book is basically a description of the heavenlies and of what the perfect temple was supposed to be done, how it was supposed to be built on earth, because it's supposed to be a reflection of what was seen in the heavenlies. Okay? It is believed by many that this is the exact dimensions to which the third temple that hasn't yet been built. The foundation stone's been laid a few years ago, but the temple has not been built. On the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Actually, I think they have the location of the previous temple wrong, but that's a whole other study. But many people believe that when the new temple is built, these are going to be the exact dimensions. I'm not sure about that. I think this may be a later temple that's built for the 1,000-year reign. Okay, I think it may be different than the one that's going to stand when the man of perdition enters in. I have reasons for thinking that's probably the case, but we'd be here all day talking about them, and that'd be a whole other midrash. So continuing with the vision, it says, he took me out. This is the man, the angelic man that he met in previous weeks, by way of the northern gate to the outer court. And he led me up to a complex of chambers, and it's added in there, but in the JPS westward. I have not been able to figure out how they determined that he went west from the northern entrance. I'm not going to tell you that that's definitely true. I'm sure they have a reason for believing that, but since I can't give you the reason, all we know is that he went in. Up to a complex of chambers that ran parallel to the northern ends of the vacant space and the structure. The width of the facade, its north side, and the one from which it was entered, was 100 cubits. 100 cubits is 250 feet, is that correct? Okay. For those who weren't here or didn't listen to the previous message, Yarden is doing the figures for me because I get them wrong in my head sometimes. We believe that we're using a royal cubit here, not a standard cubit, because what else would you use for the throne room of Elohim, right? You would use a royal cubit. It's just my thinking. A royal cubit is almost exactly 2.5 modern feet. Okay. It was 100 cubits, and its depth was 50 cubits, 125 feet, at right angles to the 20 cubits of the inner court, 50 feet, and to the pavement of the outer court. The complex rose ledge by ledge in 3 tiers. Now, this is interesting. 3 tiers. Remember, was it last week or the week before we talked about it? If you looked at the layout and the way the walls were done, basically it's a fortress. Okay, and we talked about the angles of the walls and how they were built to keep people out, right? To separate the pure from the impure. But I said everything about the layout. For the soldier in the back of the room there, you may want to go back and listen to that. I know you weren't here, but I think you'll find it very intriguing that this is basically a palace of worship and a fortress for the throne room of Elohim. But there's a concept, a military concept. I never thought about this until I was studying for this message. There is a military concept, a paramilitary concept of 3 tiers of action. Okay? Tier 1 is military. Tier 2 is I don't know if you'd say civilian military, professional warriors, so to speak, who are not military, police, that sort of thing. And the third tier is the common man knowing how to defend himself. Okay, because when it gets really, really bad and all the defenses have fallen and all you've got is pitchforks and torches, that's the third tier. Now, I never thought about, until I thought about the connection of the defensive nature of the temple. And then I just taught on that last week. I thought about that years ago, but I just taught about it last week. And then I was studying for this, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, 3 tiers. I cannot swear that the concept of 3 tiers of military defense come from the design of the temple, but I do believe there's a connection. I don't know how far back the teaching of the 3 tiers goes in different militaries in the world. I know all over the world, different military groups use that. Either it comes from this or this design has something to do with that teaching. I sincerely believe that has something to do with the levels of a hierarchy of how they would defend the temple from invasion. You have to remember, like I said last week, when the entire city fell, the temple kept standing. Okay. When all of the army of Israel surrendered, the Haggadah Levi, the Levites whose job was to defend the temple, kept fighting. Okay, and they were able to, I think, because of the design of the temple. There was an areaway 10 cubits, so 25 feet wide, and a road of 1 cubit, 2.5 feet, running along the inner court side of the chamber complex, but its entrances were on its north side. Here, its upper chambers were cut back because ledges took away from them as construction proceeded backward from the bottom ones and then from the middle ones. I've only ever seen a construction done like that one time, and it was a defensive structure. You know what I'm talking about? We'll talk later. For they are arranged in 3 tiers, and they had no columns like those of the chambers in the courts. That is why the rise proceeded by stages from the ground, from the bottom ones, and from the middle ones. In the outer court, a wall 50 cubits, so 125 feet long, ran parallel to the chamber complex up to the chambers in the outer court. Of the chambers in the outer court were themselves 50 cubits, 125 feet deep, thus completing 100 cubits, 225, 220, 250, 250 feet, alongside the edifice. Thus, at the foot of that complex of chambers ran a passage of a width set by the wall in the outer court, which one entered from the east in order to gain access to them from the outer court. Anybody seeing a labyrinth in their mind? Okay. Defensively, this is ingenious. If you did not live in the temple, you couldn't find your way to half the stuff in it. Okay, I remember a story my uncle told me of the first time he was ever on a ship. He was in the Marines. The first time he ever deployed, he was on a naval ship. And the captain of the ship walked his unit from one end of the ship to the other, up and down every deck, and he said, I've shown you everything one time, don't ever ask again. My uncle said it was a month before he could even find his duty station without asking another Marine how to get there. Okay? Because the way the ship was laid out. That's what I see in my mind here. If you weren't a Levite, probably, especially if you weren't a Haggadah Levi, you didn't know where half these passages went. How much easier is that to defend than something that everybody knows how to get into? There was another chamber complex to the east of the vacant space, and the structure likewise with a passage in front, just like the complex on the north side. with which this one agreed in width and depth and in the exact layout of its exits and entrances. Accordingly, the entrances to the chamber complex on the south side were approached from the east by the entrance at the head of the corresponding passage along the matching wall. Can we say confusing? To get to the south side, you have to enter through the east and know which passageway to go through. Okay, we have in our heads, because it's what's taught to us, that the temple was just a house of worship. You just walked in and it was this big room and everybody sang and prayed there. There were rooms for that on the outer parts. But the closer you got to the Holy of Holies, the closer you got to the actual sanctuary for the Ark of the Pact, or the Ark of the Covenant, depending on how you translate it, the closer you got to that, the more lost you got if you didn't know what you were doing. And he said to me, the northern chambers and the southern chambers by the vacant space are the consecrated chambers in which the priests who have access to Yehovah shall eat the most holy offerings. There they shall deposit the most holy offerings, the meal offerings, the sin offerings, the guilt offerings, for the place is consecrated. When the priests enter, they shall not proceed from the consecrated place to the outer court without first leaving here the vestments in which they minister. It says they put in the vestments. I believe that I think that's probably a correct inclusion there, but the vestments on the second one isn't there in the text. It says are consecrated. It could also mean that the priests are consecrated. Before proceeding to the area open to the people, they shall put on other garments. Now we're getting into what this is really about. Could the temple be easily defended? Yes. Would invaders get lost getting into it? Yes. But when you get right down to it, this is a picture of dividing what is holy from what is unholy. The priests from the common people. Okay, and we see this throughout Torah. We see this not mixing types of plants in your garden. Okay, you plant a garden or plant a field, you plant a row of what you got. You don't interweave the different types of plants. Why? Because they're distinct. And if you cross them, if you plant them too close together, they cross-pollinate each other. We learned this the hard way one year. If you plant a row of popcorn and a row of sweet corn, the sweet corn comes out tasting nasty every time, because the pollen from the popcorn will overwhelm the genetics of the sweet corn, and it's just horrible. Okay, you didn't even want to eat it. Okay, you can do this with a lot of different types of plants, and so Scripture says keep them separate. Plant them in separate sections so that they don't pollute each other. Okay? Not mixing wool and linen. Wool was what every common man wore. Linen was what the priest wore. Don't ever interweave them. Why? Because he wants a distinction between what's holy and what's common. What's sanctified and what isn't. Okay? This is a picture of what it is to be Jewish, what it is to be Israel, versus what it is not to be. Okay? We should be as distinct from the world as linen is from wool. We should be as distinct as sweet corn is from popcorn. Okay? Do you all know that a mule is an abomination before Elohim? I would never own a mule. You know why? Because it's a cross between a horse and a donkey. Okay? That's why all mules are male and no mules are fertile. Doesn't matter what you try to breed it with, a mule cannot breed. Okay? Because they are distinct enough that they have to be separated. Now, you can cross a horse and a zebra. They're closely related enough. Okay? Do I think you should do it? No. Because they're divided, they're separate enough that we should keep them separate. Why? Because it's another picture of what it's holding. Now, does it say don't cross a horse and a zebra? No, it doesn't. But it says to keep your livestock separated so that they don't do that. Okay? I want to touch on this for a second. There are people, sadly, in mainline churches, I've heard this preached over and over again. I got ran out of a church one time because I preached the opposite of it, and I don't care. I hope somebody was listening. Deacon had told me I could never come back to that church because he believed that for a white person and a black person, or a white person and an Asian person to intermarry and have children was an abomination, and he used this scripture. Not this specific scripture, but the scriptures I was talking to you before about separating the livestock. And he told me this, I think the day before I spoke. Lena, my niece, was there visiting with us. And he was appalled that I had a Korean niece. He wanted to know where was she adopted from. I said, she wasn't adopted. She's my wife's natural-born niece. Her father's Korean. She's actually on the recorder, but you can't tell it looking at her. She looks like full-blown Korean. And he just could not stand this idea. And he gave his lecture about, don't you know, we're not supposed to intermarry. You're not supposed to marry outside of your own people. That's funny because all it tells me is a Jew isn't supposed to marry outside of the Jewish faith. Okay? Or, well, out of the tribe. Okay? So if you know you're ethnically Jewish, you ought to be looking for an ethnic Jew to marry, and you ought to be raising your children Jewish. Or looking for a convert who has come in from the outside who has made that true commitment. And you know what? His or her children will be considered natural born. And so I responded with this, and we argued quite a bit. And then I went back to where I was staying, and I just could not believe that he was teaching this to people. So I got up the next day and I preached on one blood. We have sinned because we have one ancestor. Adam and Ava, sin. One man, one woman, sin. And everyone from after that was born with a deficiency to sin. Because we have one blood. If that was not true, then only a certain race would have to worry about sin and salvation. Okay? One Messiah, one Mashiach, descended from Melech David. Or David HaMelech, I think is the proper way to say it. So we established. From King David. One Mashiach descended from his throne, gave one blood for the salvation of every human being who would accept it. When Elohim tells us not to marry outside of our people, he's saying, no, don't marry outside of the faith. Don't marry outside of the covenant. As Mashiach said, don't be unevenly yoked. I'm sorry, I think Sheldon said that. Don't be unevenly yoked. I apologize. We cannot look at the separation of garments and the separation of livestock as an excuse for racism. Goes back to my earlier message. The Arabs aren't supposed to be our enemies, they're supposed to be our cousins. We just forget that. And they do too. That kind of thinking leads to the kind of thinking that leads to horrible atrocities. That is not what he meant by not intermingling outside of your people. When he had finished the measurements of the inner temple, he led me out by way of the gate which faces east, and he measured the entire area. He measured the east side with the measuring rod 500 cubits, 1,250 feet. In rods by the measuring rod, he measured the north side 500 cubits, 1,250 feet. In rods by the measuring rod, he measured the south side 500 cubits, 1,250 feet. In rods by the measuring rod. Then he turned to the west side, measured it 500 cubits, 1,250 feet, in rods by the measuring rod. Thus he measured it on the four sides. It had a wall completely surrounding it, 500 cubits long, 1,250 feet, on each side to separate, get this, the consecrated from the unconsecrated. The common, or the holy from the common. He's not kidding. This isn't something he thinks is a good idea. This is his plan. And we best be following it. Because you know what that wall represents? The interior versus the exterior. That represents the covenant. Because just as the priests were the only ones who knew the inner sanctum, so to speak, the inner hallways, and they were to be priests to us, guess what? We were to be priests to the outside world. We were to be in the world, but not of the world. We were to know where our home was. Our home is inside those walls. And this is those walls. The Torah. People say the Torah is so restricting. Thank Elohim. Thank Elohim that we're not outliving, or shouldn't be outliving, the way the world lives. We all stumble, we all make mistakes, we're all human. But when we realize we've wandered outside the wall, we need to get back in there. And we need to try to learn how to get into those inner chambers. That's his plan for us. How do you get into the inner chambers? You deeper into the Word. It's all a picture, folks. It's all a lesson. Do we have a midrash on this? Yes.
I think it's. I agree with the. What you said about one blood and one people. Also, I was going to say this in the last Genesis teaching, and I think kind of reiterated in this. Well, you actually said that it's a heavy burden. I don't think it really. I mean, it's a heavy responsibility to Torah, but I wouldn't call it a burden because it teaches you. I mean, it's a responsibility as a heavy burden, but it's not a burden as in like it's a burden on your life. Like
no, that's not what
it's a burden. It's a
heavy responsibility.
Because living in sin is a burden on your life.
Yes. You're exactly right.
That's an actual burden.
It's two different uses of the same burden.
But I just wanted to make sure, clarify that because the way the world lives, is a burden.
Yeah, having lived both ways, I would not want to go back. And when I find myself stumbling back, I hate it.
Yep.
I hate it because I don't want to go back to that at all. Anybody else?